Hello to anyone that's joined so far. We're just going to wait a minute or so to uh, admit some more attendees. Okay, brilliant. I think we're going to get started then. So thank you everyone for joining. My name is Erica Holtwhite. I'm the Research and Policy Manager at the Sutton Trust. I'm one of the co-investigators on the Room to Grow School-Based Nurseries research report that was jointly led by a team of myself, Carl Cullinan and Dr. Rebecca Montague from the Social Market Foundation, and we were supported by the funding from Nuffield Foundation, who have also funded this webinar. So today we're going to be running through some findings from our report, as well as an introduction to the project team, the policy priorities identified in the report, and the best guidance practice that we have for those that are considering opening a school-based nursery setting, as well as to those already working in one. We're also delighted to be joined by some participants in our research reports case studies. So we have Amy Barlow from Maple Court in Stoke-on-Trent in the Midlands. Amy is assistant principal and the EYFS lead at the setting. And the nursery is currently in its fourth year of operating and offering over 25 places to 3 to 4-year-olds. We also have Dora Rackham and Thomas McGroin from the City Academy Whitehawk School, who have Hatchlings Nursery, a school-based and school-run setting that shares a site with the school City Academy Whitehawk, located in one of the most disadvantaged parts of Brighton. The setting was opened in 2019 and was opened after positive experiences experienced by other school-based nurseries at the primaries in their organisation, Aurora Academies Trust. So thank you all for joining. I'll pass over to you a bit later, but to start off, I'll go through an introduction to the main drivers for this research project. So on the research team, as mentioned, this was a collaboration between the Sutton Trust and the Social Market Foundation. As an introduction to those that aren't familiar with us as organisations, the Sutton Trust is the UK's leading social mobility charity. Our programmes aim to empower young people to access life-changing opportunities, and our research influences national change to deliver a fairer future. We worked on this project with the Social Market Foundation, who are Britain's leading cross-party think tank. The SMF's mission is to enable markets and government to work together to benefit society through the development of high-quality, independent and pragmatic public policy research and debate across a wide range of social and economic areas. And the reason why, as organisations, we thought this project was an important thing to be doing is that the school-based nursery programme is a notable moment in the government's journey in delivering on two of its main early years policy priorities, those being access to childcare for working families, but also increasing the proportion of children that are meeting a good level of development as measured using the early years foundation stage framework. This programme is aiming to create 3,000 new or expanded nurseries on school grounds, making use of existing space in classrooms, but now also as we move to later phases of the pilot, it's also involving family hubs. The aims of the policy were to kind of create stronger links between schools and early years settings, as well as focusing on early education. And we felt that this policy has huge potential to both increase capacity and to push up the quality in early years, two of which are very important policy issues for both Sutton Trust and Social Market Foundation. The first stage of the project did a little bit of an assessment at how the policy is doing so far. So at phase one, we saw that there was definitely a rapid expansion through school-led bids for the policy, but the early data showed us that it wasn't necessarily being targeted towards disadvantaged areas specifically. It was encouraging to see this change for phase two and for phase three. And as mentioned, as we head in towards phase three, there's also been some changes to the policy, that being the greater involvement of local authorities in making applications, but also bringing in the option to open a setting on a family hub site. But again, looking at the data from phase two, we saw that there was a small increase in the proportion of schools supporting disadvantaged children, but the new nurseries have even lower levels of FSM at 22.9% across both phases. We saw that these nurseries that opened up in the phase were around a third less likely to be located in the most disadvantaged schools than pre-existing nurseries. So as we move forward into the policy, as we'll go through later, we really would like to see some more prioritisation for disadvantaged areas. But as it stands, we wanted to look into this in more detail. So the report features a literature review from the Centre of Research in Early Childhood, and also a selection of polling results that we gathered using the teacher platform TeacherTapp that surveyed over 1,000 senior leaders working in primary schools. So what we found from this was that firstly, to get a bit more of an insight into how many schools have this style of setting. So firstly, we saw that 60% of primary SLT was saying that they had a school-based setting on site. And this was more common for those in disadvantaged areas. So 74% of the most disadvantaged primaries saying that they had this level of provision, but compared to 49% in the most affluent areas. But we saw that patterns weren't equal when we looked regionally. So while 75% of primary SLT surveyed in Yorkshire and the North East had a school-based setting open, this compared to just 49% when we looked at those in the South East. We also wanted to look at how younger children, as well as those at 3 and 4, were being served, as from the literature, it was suggesting that it was those older children that were being more likely to be served by a school-based nursery setting. And that was certainly the case in our polling. So we did see that 95% of school-based settings were serving 3 to 4s, but this dramatically dropped to just 42% when thinking about 2 to 3s. And then it was even lower when we go to the younger age groups. For example, only 6% said that their school-based setting was serving those aged 1 to 2. And we'll go into this a little bit more during the rest of the slides. But obviously, this is related to the different levels of qualification, staffing ratios, and understanding of pedagogy and things like that, that impact the needs that schools need to have in their settings to be serving those younger age groups. We wanted to know as well if those primary schools could see the clear benefits of opening school-based settings, and these findings really do highlight the strengths of this style of setting, and particularly how it can be beneficial for those from a disadvantaged background, but also those with SEND needs. So in particular, primary SLT were clear to highlight that it really facilitates a smoother transition into reception if you've got a school-based setting. 78% said that. 75% that they helped with identifying SEND needs and helping those children to continue into the primary school. And then 71% that said they could identify that children were arriving at school feeling more ready. Other elements on the slide highlighted there, think about the relationships between parents as well, but then also some bits about kind of filling places in the school, and less popular options in the survey, but still highlighted by some participants were the ease for curriculum planning and the reduced need for kind of behaviour-related interventions at the primary year groups. We also wanted to understand a bit more about whether those that did have a school-based setting, how they were working together as a school and a nursery. And it was really encouraging to see the kind of benefits that our literature review had highlighted were very common in those settings. So 85% were sharing policies, whether that be on things like safeguarding or SEND. 83% had joint CPD opportunities, which is something that has come up in early years workforce research as something that is important and maybe isn't as easily accessible for those in other settings. 80% said that they shared equipment or other resources, and other popular options included sharing staff, a staff room, and student data. less were able to uh, admit kind of their students as a priority into the primary school, which I guess is an element expected, depending on kind of catchment issues and things like that. And less were kind of running joint classes between the primary and the nursery, but some were doing so at 25%. Then thinking about those benefits, we also wanted to see if these benefits were something that, if you haven't got a school-based setting, were they things that you maybe share with your local early year settings? And while our polling found that senior leaders found that these kind of links were really important, it was less common. So even the top kind of identified issue at 8% of for sharing student data is quite low. 73% of those without a school-based nursery said that they didn't share any of the suggested links between their local settings and primary school. As said, despite them saying that these kind of benefits were important, which suggests there may be some kind of mismatch there in terms of the importance of the connections to your local early years settings as a primary school, but there may be difficulties there for doing so in that relationship. So moving forward, the data has kind of showed us that the government not yet has reached the target of 3,000 nurseries. So is there an appetite amongst primary schools without a school-based setting to open one? And as said, even though SLT was showing that they really recognise the benefits of doing it, only 3% actually have plans already in place to do so. And when you bring in people that are saying that it's quite likely that their school will open one, this only raises the kind of figure to 1 in 5. So this kind of indicates that it could be difficult at this current moment in time for the government to reach their target, which is interesting when we take into account that now local authorities are coming involved and also the option of opening on a family hub site, but also indicates that there may be something to be done to kind of guide schools in terms of why there is a value of having an early year setting and support on why it and how it can be feasible for them. Because as our data indicates here, there are still many barriers for schools without early year settings that need to be tackled. The school-based nurseries pilot looks at funding for space, for example, but maybe doesn't pick up on any of the other financial issues that schools may have. For example, 51% told us that they don't have suitable indoor space, and 50% said the startup costs are still too high. Also, we have to take into account the needs of a local area and the parents in the vicinity of the school, and whether that school can meet families' needs and if there's actually the demand for it and the financial viability. 46% said that it wasn't a financially viable option for the school. Again, outside space was an issue, as well as staff capacity, and some less common issues on the slide here, but still indicated were a lack of SLT support, for example, a lack of the knowledge for the particular age groups being served, and also issues recruiting staff to serve the settings. And even if those that have those barriers, we ask them to think if they were going to open a setting, is this actually going to be a setting for all children in that kind of early years band, or is it still going to follow the pattern that we've seen in existing school-based nurseries that it's older ages that are supported? So 40% said it would serve 3 to 4s, but only 32% said that if they were to open a setting, it would serve 2 to 3s. And once again, there's a big drop off when we go to the younger ages. For example, just 10% saying that they'd be confident that their setting could serve those aged 1 to 2. So what does this mean for policy? The report sets out a lot of recommendations, and I'll do a bit of a whistle-stop tour of what we've put forward for government before moving into some guidance on best practice. I should also say that if there was anything that I went through on the slides there that you want to take a close look at, the report is available on the Sutton Trust website. And of course, you can drop any questions throughout this webinar into the Q&A box, and we'll come to them at the end of the session. So on policy lines for government, we're of course in support of expansion of the school-based nursery programme, as I think our research has really highlighted the clear benefits, in particular for disadvantaged young children of attending a school-based nursery. But there still needs to be a bit more clarification in terms of the programme's purpose, particularly whether it's designed to allow quick expansion or if it really is to improve access to high quality early education, and how those two match together in delivery is obviously important. And for this, it's particularly important to be considering how data is needed to monitor the performance of the school-based settings that we're opening and to kind of, set the stead for the next expansion of the settings. We also feel that disadvantaged areas should be prioritised in further rollout of the programme, but we acknowledge that without the kind of changes needed to funding for early years places for disadvantaged families, that this won't reach the benefits and the clear targets that the government have. The Sutton Trust has long called for improvements to availability of funded hours for ages 2s, 3s and 4s, and we'd like to see equal access to funded entitlements from at least age 2. We also feel that the financial barriers for settings should need to be further addressed, particularly the costs that are beyond those setup costs of, for example, building the space that you need for your setting, but also to kind of avoid those schoolification issues when expanding. This particularly is important when it comes to the staff that are working in the earlier setting and picks up on those issues that we mentioned about there are less settings that are serving younger children at the moment, but this relates a bit to the different levels of teaching and different styles of activity that you need to do. But schools need to be supported in how to do that at their setting to avoid the schoolification of the early years system. And also the longer term learnings will be really useful to work out how the balance works between the state and private sector in the early years system, as well as clarifying the role of school-based nurseries in the wider early years ecosystem. We haven't really mentioned, I guess, the maintained versus PVI settings. I will do a little bit in the next couple of slides, but I think that's an important element to remember here, as there are models, of course, that it's a school-based nursery. That doesn't necessarily mean the school are running it themselves. There are also some fantastic partnerships of schools working with private providers in the area that can come in and use the space to run a nursery. And that leads us nicely on to a few lines of our report that point to the best practice guidance for those opening a school-based nursery. So we saw that it was really impactful when a setting can have staff that have age-appropriate early years experience and the expertise, particularly when we're thinking about those younger age groups, as mentioned. This again picks up on the schoolification point of the early years system. It's also important to think about these excellent things that we showcased in terms of collaboration, but to remember that this isn't automatic and that schools and early year settings need to build a strong relationship from the outset that respects each other and has that senior leadership buy-in as well to be the most impactful relationship. Also, disadvantaged households should not be shut out. Of course, as mentioned on the previous slide, there's a lot of work that needs to be done from the government too in terms of universalising access, but anything that schools can do as well to be able to serve their disadvantaged families in their local area and acknowledge their needs is really important. So, for example, if you're seeing that the families are only eligible for 15 hours per week, if possible, offering split week options or maybe a subsidised extension if there are families that would like to send their child to your setting for full time. There's some case studies in the report and examples that we know that have made these models work really well. And this is a great way of being able to serve disadvantaged families in your area. We've also highlighted the need for staff that maybe have early years experience as well to manage the day-to-day setting, particularly as you're moving forward from setting up the nursery to the management. But we also had some excellent case studies that explained to us how they work with early years practitioners to put that application together for school-based nursery funding, and they've now moved to working in the setting itself. As mentioned earlier before as well about the PVI providers, this can be an option too, and it certainly should be considered if the benefits definitely work for both parties, whether that's the school as well as the PVI. And also how this mirrors into the next phase of the rollout is really important. So we know that local authorities can now be more involved and submit applications for school-based nursery funding, and they can also choose to open a setting on a family hub site. But it's really important that the expert voices from schools and early years settings themselves shouldn't be lost in these applications, and that still feeds in. Schools should be consulted so that a local authority really understands that, okay, maybe they're looking to open a nursery because they feel that there is an issue for capacity in their area, or they think that disadvantaged families in the area are looking for a different style of provision. To be consulting with schools on that is really important to make sure that the settings that are opened up are working in the right way possible. And also, as highlighted on the slides, we went through a few of the key links that schools can have to their local early years settings. And I think, again, this research really points to the value of those strong relationships, whether it's an early years setting on your school site, but also your local early years settings to support that transition phase for disadvantaged young children in particular. So that's the end of the research section of the presentation. In our report, we loved speaking to 13 settings across the country to hear their views on the school-based nursery policy, as well as their experience kind of running one. And we also, as well as school-based settings, spoke to some operating outside of schools that, as mentioned before, had some great strong links to their local settings. So firstly, I'm going to pass over to Amy from Maple Court, who's going to tell us about her early years setting. So I'll just stop sharing my slides and pass to you, Amy.
Thank you. So I'm Amy Barlow. I'm the early years lead and assistant principal at Maple Court Academy. So we serve a deprived community. Within our schools, 63% of our pupils are pupil premium and eligible for free school meals. And our school nursery is currently coming to the end of its 4th year of operating. And within that, we've seen huge growth within the whole early years department in lots of different areas in terms of children coming more school ready as they are beginning to start in reception. And we've seen the benefits of this through the increase of our GLD year upon year. We're seeing an increase in getting closer and closer to that government target of 75%. So last year our GLD was 72%, and that's risen from low 60s. So we found that having the nursery has had huge benefits. As I've said, we do serve quite a deprived community. Within our nursery, we have 26 places, and this is a little bit of a barrier for us as a school, as we have a 60-place reception. So we track our nursery children very closely as they move, not just through early years, but through the rest of the academy. So we've tracked them through Key Stage 1, and our first nursery cohort are just coming to the end of their Key Stage 1 journey. So we've tracked them all the way through, and we see that these children outperform their peers. So they outperform their peers for their good level of development. They've outperformed their peers in terms of their phonics screening check in year 1. So we see that from having them from an earlier age, we really do reap the benefits of having that. I know Erica has spoken about funding. Funding is something that a lot of our parents struggle to pay for childcare. Only 23% of our nursery cohort are eligible for their 30 hours funding. The rest of the cohort are only eligible for 15 hours. So with this in mind, we wanted to make it affordable for our families because we really value that early childhood education. So it is subsidised, and our families pay £15 a week, which then entitles them to 30 hours of childcare. We find that our families generally, this is a price that they are happy with. We have had to make adaptations for some families who haven't been able to afford it, but this isn't something that we've come into contact an awful lot with. So based on the success of our school-based nursery, we are actually really excited that in the next academic year we will be expanding our offer. So we will be moving from 26 places to 34 places, and then 42. And we will be looking to fill those places with predominantly 3 and 4 year olds, and looking at the rising 3s to get children into the school at an even earlier stage, so that we can really have an impact. For us, communication and language is one of our biggest barriers that we face as an academy. Children coming in from very low starting points, and we find that through having our nursery, we're able to get in there sooner with making speech and language referrals, and we see that this really has a benefit within the nursery year. And again, looking at that data at the end of EYFS, as children are completing the EYFSP, we're in 91%, 96%. This year again, 96% of our children who attended our nursery are getting their early learning goal for comprehension, speaking and listening. So we really do see the impact. And again, it's our children that have come to us from the age of 3 that are outperforming their peers that have started with us in reception. So this is something that we, as I say, there's something that we really do value, and we're excited to be expanding that provision. And we're hoping that this will have even greater impact on those children who are coming to us in reception. So I know I've spoken a lot about data, but things such as those basic skills that we expect the children to be coming to school with, such as using cutlery, being able to put on their own coat, being able to manage their basic needs, being able to use the toilet. We find that through children coming to nursery and those basic skills already being embedded, they get off to a flying start in reception. They're already familiar with the ethos of the school. They're already part of our school family, very much incorporated into the life of Maple Court from nursery right up to year 6. So for us, the benefits have just been phenomenal. We really have reaped the benefits of it, and we're hoping to see that through expanding, we'll be able to continue to grow with that, with the expansion of the provision and also the offer of rising threes.
Great. Thank you so much, Amy. That's really impactful data for school-based settings, but on attending an earlier setting as a whole, and fantastic news about the expansion. So thank you again, Amy. And I'll pass to Dora and Thomas.
Hey everybody. As Erica introduced us, I'm Thomas McMorrin, Director of School Improvement for Aurora Academies Trust, but first and foremost, Head Teacher of City Academy Whitehawk. And this is my wonderful colleague.
I'm Dora. I'm Assistant Head Teacher here for early years, and I also work across our trust for early years and early reading.
And it feels like a bit of a cheeky way to start, but basically everything Amy just said is what we'd prepared to say to you. So I think Amy and we could probably swap jobs and have very similar days. It sounds like a wonderful place to work. So we are in City Academy Whitehawk, which is a 2-form entry school in Brighton, so southeast coast of England. 80% of the children who attend City Academy Whitehawk are in the top 10% most deprived country in the children, so 66% free school meals. When you think of Brighton, people tend to think of pride and inclusivity and multicultural environments. Whitehawk is anomalous in that we are 85% white British, predominantly non-working families, and with that comes a set of challenges. So we, through a range of circumstances, the trust that the school was first a part of, following an inadequate Ofsted inspection, dissolved. So in 2017, we became the 6th Aurora Academy. Well, 4 of the other Aurora Academies already had nurseries that were really successful. So then in November 2018, when we earned our first outstanding judgment for early years, it seemed silly for Whitehawk not to expand its offer for the early years to stretch before reception and bring in that nursery cohort. And so we set about designing the hatchlings. And I've promised Dora that I won't steal her bit. So I'll just limit my prattling to kind of what we dreamt up when we spoke about launching the nursery. We knew it to be the case that a great many children started school, just like Amy, with a developmental delay in language acquisition, application, and understanding. And so if we knew that about 70% of each cohort started with that delay, let's try and meet these children as early as possible. It was not uncommon for our children to start school not having had sustained absence at a nursery. So there were 2 large community nurseries in the area, but attendance was fleeting or in line with sporadic working patterns. So a period of long and sustained attendance wasn't families' norm. And so for a great many years, our school was battling really poor attendance, well below any sort of acceptable level, let alone national levels. So we thought if we can get a bank of school starters who know what to wear and know where to come, and we can start building trust with families really early, because if you're inducting a child the term after their third birthday, you're meeting families when their babies are 2 and 1, and so because we're all about civic leadership and serving the community, we reached the point of kind of conception, if you like, for the idea of the nursery with, let's meet people where they are and provide something that they need that will make school readiness a thing. Because I share your views on schoolification, and the teacher tap responses speak to it. But I was staggered by the statistic you shared, Erica, that said that 27% of schools are reporting that they share policies with nurseries. Like, we would have said 0. And so what we wanted to do is really create our own luck. And our mantra as a school is like, as in an imperfect system, let's be the best thing in it. So when we set up the hatchlings nurseries, we knew what we really wanted, and that was to help children be ready for their next phase. Dora, take it from there.
So yeah, in terms of our learnings and things that we've done in particular with our nursery, first and foremost, we knew it was really important for our senior leadership team to have a good understanding of the early years, including nursery, so that we could take those advantages to get children ready for school, but in the right way. And a big part of that was developing our curriculum so that we're working on the prime areas and the foundational skills that children need to be ready for reception, rather than trying to dilute or mirror reception practice in nursery. In terms of the operation side of things, we really wanted to put our nursery to sit under our whole school umbrella practices as much as possible, because we knew that meant we could streamline things and increase efficiency with how our things were working in our organisation. But it also meant that those more grey areas in terms of attendance for non-statutory school-aged children could sit with our attendance officer, so that we could develop those attendance behaviours for school early on with families, build that trust, and also ensure that our safeguarding practices were really strong, because we had a really good handle on all of that information for our families. We also thought quite carefully about the community that we serve and what our families wanted. So we run our nursery on a 2.5-day split. So that means children attend for two full days, and morning or an afternoon. And then we have a handful of places for 30 hours. And that's because the majority of our families claim 15-hour places. So that was really important to us that we did that.
At the point of setting up, we had the option, because we're determined, our offer was determined by square footage available to us. We could have had, just like Amy, we could have had 26 placements, but for us, we can only fit as many as 15 children in a room. So we could have 15 children full-time, or 2 cohorts of 15. And so what we did was we went with, as Dora says, the 15-hour claim as the predominant factor amongst those families. So Monday morning to Wednesday lunch to Friday tea time meant that we could meet as many as 32 children across a week and start that next phase readiness.
And then in terms of learnings for us, we had to think really carefully about ratios, of course, in terms of being statutory compliant, but actually thinking about our staff model and how that works with lunch breaks and ratios within the room. That's something that's really key to consider with your staffing plan. We also run the foundation village approach, which means our nursery children mix with our reception children, because that gives us opportunity for stretch and challenge for our children, and also consolidation for our children who need it more. But we had to think really carefully about how we did that so that every child got what they needed. And that was a big part of how that fitted in with our curriculum. But I'd say what we've seen is very similar to Amy, is the school readiness of our children who have attended our nursery is really significant and really noticeable. We've also seen that there's such a reduced transition into school, and would almost say like little to no transition for those children. because we think even about, where their water bottles are in the room is the same as the reception classroom, because all of those things add up to be big things for children. And it's also meant in terms of intervention for our children, because we're in that whole school practice, getting children onto pathways, that we've been able to do that earlier and start that journey for families who need that support. And we've been able to use our whole school facilities, such as our speech and language programme, to have targeted intervention for those children so that they're making progress earlier with those areas, particularly communication and language.
So what we do is we've embedded in all staff that work here at the point of applying for jobs. You'll earn exactly the same money at the school down the road, so that you need to know if you're coming here, it's going to be more challenging, but the rewards are going to be all the sweeter. So the nursery staff understand that they get an eighth of the child's time at this school. And so we're really lucky that's you, but you're feeding into reception, who are feeding into Key Stage 1, who are feeding into Key Stage 2. So we've achieved this cohesion so that our hatchlings are our robins who become our woodpeckers. And it's the start of 8 years rather than senior leaders getting to grips with that bit of the building. And so, as Dora says, it all sits under that one umbrella. And we feel very, very proud of what Dora's done. So then in 2024-25, we earned our second outstanding judgment for the early years.
Great. Thank you very much, both. Fantastic learnings there across a wide variety of areas, and lovely to hear that you can relate to a lot of what Amy shared as well. So thank you to the three of you for sharing those stories. So we're moving to the Q&A section now, and there's a Q&A box for attendees if you have any questions to please submit those. To start off, we have one question about the transition point. So I guess all three of you are very clear to highlight about the kind of benefits for transition for those that go to your nursery setting into the primary school. But I guess obviously there are limits, so there is no guarantee that the children that go to the nursery are going to go to your primary school. But then how do you kind of see the benefits of that, whether that's working with other local early years settings to kind of bring those benefits for transition forwards? Thomas, I can see you're nodding. Do you maybe want to start us off on that one?
Well, I just think it's down to the tenacity of the early years leaders, really. Like you make your own luck. So we have a large local authority maintained nursery 200 meters away as part of a community hub that was built in 2001. And so that's about Dora investing time in forming really meaningful relationships with the staff in that setting, but also Dora having to spend most of her summer term driving to the 7 other settings that will send us 1 or 2 children. So it comes down to the tenacity of the early years leaders to establish that relationship with families and the early years provider really early. Because I'll switch into director mode briefly. I support heads of service in local authorities with this stuff, and I'm with heads of service who are lamenting children's starting point. So, well, what change might you affect? Like, and where can you make your luck? Because when did you do a kind of toilet readiness program with schools, or when did you do a hygiene readiness program, a dental hygiene readiness program with schools? Because it's give and take, and I think schools can lament their position, or they can go looking for the information they need. You find a school leader that doesn't tell me this reception cohort is harder than the last reception cohort. So like, make your own luck, go and meet the children, find out where they are, and establish a relationship with their family. And I think you then look at what's within your gifts, and if that's determined by ratios or square footage, cool, be the best thing within that.
Great, thank you. Amy, did you have anything to add?
Yeah, I think in terms of, you have got to go out and find those families. I think that's how, for us, transition has developed our links with private day nurseries within our local area. Going out, it's now just a friendly face. I'll call, it's Amy from Maple Court. Yeah, come on in. No need for an appointment. Yeah, we'll give you everything that you need to do. But that's come from hard work. That's come from 12 years of knocking on the door, and at first not wanting to let you in. in, where actually now it's, yeah, not a problem, just come. And if the child isn't there that you need, having that willingness, right, we'll come back, yeah, it's not a problem. And just chipping away at those little barriers, it makes you seem approachable, that, you know, we are all in it together. We want these children to succeed.
Great, thank you. We'll move on to the next question, which was picking up on the ages of cohorts covered. So we're thinking about do you think it's feasible for school-based nurseries to deliver high quality provision for younger children, particularly under twos? Or is that where another early year setting is better placed? And then I guess there's a second part of this question, thinking about how that could be involved as we move forward to the next phase of this programme, that is saying that you could be opening nurseries on more of the sites of Best Start family hubs. Amy, do you want to start on that one?
For us as an academy, we are quite a small academy trust with 4 primary schools. It is something that we have thought about and we've explored with younger children. We have got some local school-based nurseries that do offer 2-year-old provision. And it's debatable about the impact that that's having as they move through. Obviously, the cost implication of having younger children in the setting, because the ratios are then higher. You need a higher number of staff in the setting, and then obviously it's putting it out to expertise and making sure that you've got that provision right. So that is something that we've looked at, but we don't feel that we are in a position to expand within that. There's not a lot of offer within our local area.
Thanks, Amy. Dora and Thomas?
So in terms of our trust, our nurseries do take from 2. And I think we've seen it's been a really amazing thing. And for our children, again, the benefits we've seen with the 3 to 4-year-olds being ready for reception, it just starts earlier. But I would say that you absolutely need that specialist knowledge when working with those children. It's really key, I think, early years, especially working with those really young children. There's so much that you need to understand about their development, and also see that they do need things that are different to those 3 to 4-year-olds. And it's the real balance of getting it right for all of those children. And I think when we think about school curriculums, often we think in terms, but we know that in our nursery curriculum, we've had to think much more fluidly about children's arrivals and departures, and also their age, because we can't see it in a school year. And that's a really key thing when thinking about the curriculum for the younger children.
Coming at it from a school leader point of view across multiple settings, I think that you have to evaluate your effectiveness through the lens of a provider of early years. I quite often see school leaders, like Dora said about term dates. So poor Dora, I called her into a thing. I was like, how are we going to make this nursery thing work? And I'm thinking in rotations of 6 half terms. And that's just not how to run an effective early year setting. So it takes openness of school leaders to listen to the expertise that Dora is talking about, and that brings in vulnerability for most school leaders. So I think it's being open to change and knowing that lots of leaders are rightly risk averse when it comes to babies, and so it's knowing what you can offer, and then listening to the experts at hand, because as Dora said, you know, it's establishing a network of expertise, particularly in a school setting, and then looking at that setting through the lens of an early years provider rather than someone who wants them to be year 1 kids one day.
Definitely. Thank you. And I hope that the kind of evidence that we've presented in the guide is helpful for those that want to kind of help to support the case and show senior leaders of the value of opening up a nursery in a school. So yes, thank you for answers all. This could be the last question. So I'll give it to all 3 of you. What would your first piece of top evidence be for a school that's planning to set up a school-based nursery? Any volunteers to take that first?
Do you want to rock, paper, scissors for it? I would think about our role as civic leaders and people who serve a community. And so we have to, I would say to Georgia, who asked that question, what is it that you know about your community? And to what extent is your vision and values determined by what that community needs? Once you've established that, what do the last few rounds of reception baselining tell you about the typicality of your school starters? And then set about designing with those phenomenal reception staff, what is it that we know to be true of our school starters? What might we have wanted to have been different before this September? So once I know my community, I'll set out my stall and I'll say, we're about service. That's what we're about. We're about service. What do I know? What do I know about the young people that come to see me? I know that managing self was a deficiency in autumn. And I know that speaking and listening was a deficiency. And so, okay, what does a nursery curriculum offer look like? And then you liaise with experts, with like Dora, and give them parameters to exercise their expertise.
And I think I would say to add to that would be when you think about setting up your nursery, how do you see it fitting into the rest of your school? Because the things that have really strengthened our nursery is the way that it's built into the rest of the school, with whether that's whole school events or using whole school resources, because that's what's made it such a strong part of our school, and also means that you've got that involvement from all of your team and everyone feels really confident with how that fits and feeds into the school.
Thank you both. Amy?
I think similarly, it's about looking at that. What is your reception? What's your reception data showing you? But really importantly, and this is something that we've battled with, again, what is in excuse me, I can't get my words out. What is on offer within the local area? Because it's great, you might want a nursery, but actually, if there's no need for it, we've found that within our local area, because we've got 3 PVIs within a 5-10 minute walking distance to our school. So that nursery offer is there, those places are there. So how do we then fill our nursery? It's something that we've had to think really carefully about, because, as we school leaders and the principals and things, they don't want those spaces to be sat there to be empty, because that's not helping. So there's no point it going ahead if, like I said, you can't fill those places, and then also you're not having the impact that you want them to have. So I think it's really about scrutinizing that data and where are the gaps, what are the children lacking as they start their journey with you, and is there a need for it within that local area. For us, before having a nursery, we went into the PVIs, and we were working alongside. We supported with things, the delivery of phonics, approaches taken with maths. Obviously, that's also comes at a cost. That's our time, and isn't always sustainable. So, we did reach out before we went down the route of having a nursery to try and get those relationships. So it is just looking at, is there a need for it ultimately?
Great. Thank you, Amy, and thank you all for sending in questions. And thank you to all the guests at the webinar. Your passion really came through the presentations, and I think that's great to see, and hopefully has been useful for those attending. We have recorded the session, so for anyone that wants to share this with colleagues, or if you're ever discussing this topic with anyone, the recording as well as the research report will be available to share. So I would definitely encourage you to do that, and hopefully this will be a useful resource as we move through the next phases of school-based nursery rollout. And to end, again, to thank you to our panelists, as well as those at the Sutton Trust for organising today's webinar, those at the Social Market Foundation who worked on this research, and for the backing of the Nuffield Foundation on this project. So thank you all, and hopefully see you soon.